Hey guys, I'm Samcrac, and when it comes time to go used car shopping, a consumer's number one concern is generally whether or not the car that they're interested in has been in a prior accident or not, or maybe has had any prior body work or paint work. And that's a totally legitimate concern. A car that's had any sort of body work or paint work is generally valued less than its clean example counterpart. We rely on things like vehicle history reports to give us the true identity of a vehicle before we purchase it, but the truth is those are never 100% accurate. The three cars behind me all tell a different story, and I'll be able to use them today to show you guys how to inspect your very own used car for any prior body work, paint work, or framework before you decide on purchasing it. The first car we'll take a look at is my 2015 Ford Fiesta ST. At first glance, you never know that anything was wrong with it, but this car was involved in a very severe front-end collision, totaling it out. This car had framework, bodywork, and paintwork performed to it. The next car we'll be taking a look at is this 2015 Chevrolet Spark converted into a DXP delivery vehicle. This car was also involved in a pretty severe front-end collision, but it didn't have any major frame damage. So there was a good amount of paintwork and bodywork performed to the front end of this car. Our third car is this 2004 Mercedes-Benz CLK 55 AMG. At $5,500 or best offer, it was the lowest price V8 powered AMG car on Autotempest.com. Now, the seller of this car has agreed to let me borrow the car for the shooting of this video, and if everything checks out, we've agreed on a purchase price of only $4,000. So I really hope everything does check out, but in the case that this car was involved in a major accident and has any major bodywork or framework, it just really wouldn't be worth all that much. Now, if you haven't heard of Autotempest.com, it's becoming increasingly popular among the YouTube community. Chris Fix bought his mother a mint Ford Thunderbird. Alex Palmieri snagged a legit C55 AMG. And Tavares found a super cheap Lamborghini project car. All of these guys used Autotempest.com. On Autotempest, you can tailor your search to find the perfect car. Then they take things one step further by including search results from the best online automotive marketplaces. No longer do you have to start at Craigslist, move over to eBay, then head over to AutoTrader. Autotempest puts everything on one neat, easy to read page, and it's absolutely free to use. If you want to find your very own bargain basement AMG, maybe a project car, maybe a new daily driver, be sure to head on over to Autotempest.com. You could do so using my link in the description box below. A visual inspection is our easiest and most effective way in telling whether a car has had any major bodywork performed. In between each panel is a gap or a line. All of these gaps and lines should be equidistant all the way through, and since a car is symmetrical, the lines on the driver's side should match those on the passenger side. Let's start with the front end, inspecting the gap between the hood and the front bumper. At first visual glance, everything looks pretty good, although it definitely isn't perfect. One of the things closest to the front bumper that looks a little strange is this gap in between the bumper itself and the headlight. What we'll want to do, again, since a car is symmetrical, is come to the other side and we see that same gap. So as of right now, there's no major sign that anything with this car is wrong. It's when we come over to the gap between the front bumper and the fender that we see they don't completely line up. You can see there's enough of a gap here for me to fit the tip of my finger in. And when we come down here, this fender is just slightly lower than where the bumper lines up with it. These should always be flush, especially on modern cars. Now, front bumper replacements are pretty prevalent, and third-party parts sometimes cannot be perfect. Since this is an ST model, there is no third-party bumper alternative for this specific car. When we come and compare it with the gap on the passenger side, you see we still have this little bit of gap in between the fender and the bumper, but it lines up much better. Still, it's not perfect, and it's not symmetrical to the other side. If we come up and look at the line where the hood meets the A-pillar, we can see from this angle that the hood actually sits slightly off from where the A-pillar meets with it, as well as a little paint chip in the corner. That's likely from someone trying to align the hood and touching it to the A-pillar, causing a paint chip. Comparing it with our opposite side, we can actually see it's the exact opposite. The hood is off-center towards the passenger side on this car. When it comes to the front end, one of the more notable gaps that I see out of shape a lot on cars that have body work done are the fender to door gap. Now, looking straight on, this fender to door gap looks very good. So when we come off again at this angle, we can see that the fender sits slightly higher than the door. It's hardly noticeable, but I can assure you it wouldn't leave that way from the factory. When inspecting the side of the car, you definitely want to go and look where the door meets up with the door frame. As you can see on this car, everything matches up. Our lines in between look great, and the door doesn't look crooked or offset. A car that's been sideswiped, it is very difficult for them to get the doors back in proper alignment, usually because where the door mounts on the body of the car is out of alignment, or the striker itself could be damaged or misaligned. With the doors open on your car, walk up to them and close them gently. Make sure they close all the way and complete. A car with a door issue will most always not close all the way, and you'll need to slam them for them to be fully closed. Inspect your pillars and your roofs like you would the body of your car. Make sure that the rubber gaskets here don't have any overspray on them. That would be a sign that the roof was painted. Everything on this roof looks pretty normal, and one of the other things that you want to look at is the sunroof. If you had a problem where the car was hit hard enough to dislodge the sunroof, this also might be at a funny angle and might not sit flush with the roof of the car. Quarter panels are one of the most difficult and expensive repairs when it comes to bodywork on cars today. To inspect one, you'll want to go and check out where the quarter panel meets the inside of the door frame. Inspect for any sort of welds or cuts. Inspect for a difference in paint. You see how dirty my car is? A car that had a quarter panel replaced would be all clean in there because they'd have to repaint it. Around the back where the rear bumper is, you're going to inspect it just like you would on the front bumper. See how there's no abnormal gaps, the tail lights sit in place where they should be, and there's no major gaps around them. This is a sign that obviously nothing happened here in the back end of the car. Continue all the way around. Look for missing reflectors or grills. A lot of quick buck car dealerships will leave out little things because they feel like people just don't notice. Again, here, this gap is completely symmetrical to the driver's side. Now, with our quick visual inspection of the Fiesta ST, we can tell that this car had damage in the front end due to its body lines. So, to investigate further, we'll want to go ahead and pop the hood. Underneath the hood is where a lot of body shop secrets lie, and we can actually start literally underneath the hood with this hood insulating blanket. Look at all the push pins that are in it holding it to the bottom of the hood. They all match, but this one right here, you can see it is a different diameter and different style than all of the other ones. This is common practice at a body shop. When you run out of one clip, go find a clip that you have left over from another car. Continue your hunt for assorted pins and screws in the engine bay. Anything that looks like it doesn't belong, or in some cases, you'll find a screw or a pinhole that's completely open, doesn't have anything in it. Right here is a Phillips head screw that doesn't match anything else. And I know, because I assembled the front end of this car, that there's a bolt that should go in between here. When I brought this car back to a body shop, obviously they lost that bolt and decided to just screw things back together. Now, one of my favorite things to look for are fender screws. When we get up close to a fender screw, you can see that there's paint chipping on the fender screw itself. Fender screws are painted along with the fender at the factory. Fender screws should be the same color of the car. If we clean this up, we'll see a black screw, but the second a wrench is put over this screw, it will actually chip the paint off of it, as you can see has been done here. When this car was reassembled, well, they just put the same old bolt back on. Well, there's nothing really wrong with that, but on a used car, that's a telltale sign that that area of the car was disassembled and likely repainted. One of the first things to break in a front-end collision will be your headlights. They're completely made out of plastic, and they're mounted in by plastic mounting tabs. Even on higher-end luxury cars, they still use plastic mounting brackets nowadays. So, one of the big things I want you to notice on this car, and this would be really tough to see, is that this mounting tab has a crosshatch pattern. This mounting tab is completely smooth black plastic. That's because this mounting tab was repaired. The body shop went as far to go ahead and smooth over this mounting tab, which was not broken, but just to make it look identical to the one on that side. It's something you would never know unless you took a close look at the details. But again, with a Phillips head screw that's just screwing both the plastic pieces together, that is our telltale sign that we have an issue on the front end of this car. Now it's time to dive deep and find the frame damage in our car. It's easy to see the insides of a frame and our engine bay. Anything that's below our major components can be considered part of the unibody. But in a front end collision, what we want to be most concerned about is our frame rails. Right here is our coolant overflow tank. Underneath it is our motor mount, and our motor mount bolts directly down here to our frame rail. This runs the length of the car, and your front core support, which is behind the bumper, bolts to both sides of your frame rail. When inspecting our engine bay for any sort of frame damage, walk all around the car and look at several different angles to get as best of a glimpse of the frame as you can. If we zoom in right here, we can actually see a crack in the frame rail right there. When trying to inspect the frame rail on the driver's side of this car, it's much more difficult to see. Our air box is in the way, our windshield wiper fluid reservoir is in the way. There's a lot more stuff. There's a major engine wiring harness that runs along here, but a good flashlight and a really good set of eyes, and you will see a weld that definitely didn't come from the Ford factory. Show you guys what the frame looks like exposed with none of the body panels. This is a 2017 Ford Focus RS I recently bought that was in a front end collision very similar to that of the Fiesta ST I just showed you, and it has damage to both the front frame rails. We can see right here our cross support that I was telling you about that spans the length of the front end of the car and bolts on to both frame rails here and over there. This is completely destroyed and will be replaced. Now the easy thing about this is that it just unbolts and comes right off. It's when we get to the frame rail that's a major piece of the car. This rail goes all the way back to the firewall of the car where it is welded in place at the factory. A complete replacement of one of these frame rails from the insurance company is very costly because they'd have to pull the entire engine and transmission assembly out of the car, as well as disassemble a lot of the interior, pulling the carpets up so that they could properly weld a new one of these in place. Now this frame rail is damaged right at the end, about an inch or two back. As we can see, it's bent a little bit right here towards the driver's side of the car. Like with the other side of the car, the damage on this rail begins only an inch or two back, but it is completely kinked to the left. This rail should be sitting perpendicular with me and mount on to a support right here. It shouldn't be bent at all that way. This rail will likely have to be replaced, sectioned and replaced, but if someone were to try to bend that back with the major kink in it, I would imagine it would just tear and break and be no good. When it comes to the damage on both this Focus and the Fiesta, they will require expert level repair. You need an appropriate machine and measuring tools to get this frame back in manufacturer's spec. Now that I've shown you an in-depth look of my Ford Fiesta ST, you guys might think I'm absolutely nuts to have purchased this car and even rebuilt it. But with only 13,000 miles, it drives absolutely perfect. And I paid less than half of a retail counterpart at the time of buying the wrecked car and paying to have it repaired. So at this point, you have to ask yourself, is a car that was once damaged and now repaired worth the discount? Now it's time for a walk-around check of our DXP delivery car. This car could be quite deceiving. If you look at all the lines on the body, they match up near perfect. You gotta remember, this car didn't have any major frame damage. So when replacing a body panel, things go back as they should. Everything is symmetrical and all the gaps are even and they line up perfectly. Being that this car is custom and is fitted with some aftermarket parts would make it normal that things don't look 100% symmetrical on the driver and passenger side. However, the body gaps that we'd be wanting to look at, like here where the fender meets the door, or like where the bumper meets the fender, you'd be hard pressed to find anything out of sorts. Now, even though everything lines up great on this car, we must remember that the whole entire front end was repainted. The fenders, the bumper, and the hood were completely replaced with OEM parts and repainted. One thing you might be able to do if you're an expert is look at the shades of paint between the door and the fender. Still, with my experience, it's really tough for me to spot a difference in the shades of color between the door and the fender in person. Maybe it looks different to you guys on camera. A machine done factory paint job should always be performed without flaw. Whereas if a human does a paint job, there can definitely be a few flaws. One right here that's not very notable because the car is vinyl wrapped is a small run right at the end of the hood. Runs are pretty prevalent at the edges of body panels because paint can run down and pool up in one area. If we peeled this vinyl wrap back, you would see that it's slightly higher here than it is the rest of the panel. If we get up really close to the hood on our Ford Fiesta, you can see a very small but notable paint run in the corner. That's obviously because this hood was repainted. Now, with the help of this $20 paint depth gauge I picked up on Amazon.com, and I'll link in the description box below, we can tell what panels on this car have been repainted. So if we walk up to the door here and we just take the gauge, we push it up against the paint, it should give us a reading. It tells us the paint is about 1 mil thick. We'll go ahead right here on the door and do the same exact thing. It should give us something similar, 2 mils. We'll go down in the center here and we'll see what it says now, 2 mils as well. How about on the edge of the door? 2 mils as well. Now the paint should be thicker on the fender because painters typically just sand and repaint over a fender, so there should be a couple layers of paint. We should get a reading over 2 mils. If we go ahead, push this in, it goes ahead and tells us that there's 4 mils of paint on the fender. If we come over here to the hood where most of it's been vinyl wrapped and we actually put it on the vinyl wrap, we'll get a reading that's fairly high, 13 mils. That's because vinyl wrap is much thicker than paint. If we go dead center here where there is no vinyl wrap, we get a reading of 6, much higher than the 1 to 2 mils we found on the door. Admittedly, this gauge isn't the most accurate on the market, although a much more accurate one will cost you hundreds, if not over $1,000 more. So just to figure out whether a panel has been painted or has any sort of body filler in it, it's well worth the money. Speaking of body fill, it's time to inspect our CLK 55 AMG. And my number one concern on a car this age would be whether or not one of the panels was repaired using an excessive amount of body fill. Now, an excessive amount of body fill would actually look and feel a little bit different than the rest of the car. As we discussed before, a quarter panel is one of the more expensive parts to repair on a car like this. It'd be quicker for somebody to put a substantial amount of body fill on the quarter panel than it would be to go drill and cut it out the car and replace it with the donor piece. You could start by just feeling along the paint of the car. If you feel anything that is different, that might be a sign of body fill. You can also go around and give the panel a light tap. There should be a little bit of air behind the panel. Now, it might sound different in different spots, but it will definitely feel different if there was body fill. This quarter panel checks out just fine. During my quick front end inspection with the car, it seems that the hood has equal gaps on both sides. The front bumper does look like it might have been taken off and replaced at one time, or it just has broken tabs because it's old, it's plastic, and it's been removed a time or two. This AMG should have grills all along the bottom, one for each fog light and one in the center. They all seem to be missing, and those are all fairly pricey. Our trunk sits flush with the quarters and all the gaps are equal. It opens and it closes like it should. Using our paint depth gauge all along the CLK has resulted in a 1 mil paint thickness reading. I don't think any panel at all has been repainted on this car. Now, this rear bumper is not factory. I know that because this car didn't come with quad exhaust in 2004, and it doesn't look like someone just hacked apart the other exhaust pipe. Likely somebody purchased an aftermarket or an OEM replacement for a later year CLK and put that bumper on. Either way, it fits pretty good, but it's definitely in need of a respray. The most worn component on this car is definitely the front bumper. So to get a better look, let's go ahead and pop our hood. And one of the first things I notice after popping the hood is that this bumper is a little bit loose. You can see right here that there's a plastic clip that likely goes and bolts right onto the body of the car. Now, this bumper is made of plastic and this car is old, so it's not abnormal that a few times removing this bumper for certain services, those pieces crack off, and well, they just don't fasten like they should anymore. What we really want to now look for is whether this car had any major frame damage. After taking this air duct out of the way, it's pretty simple to see this frame rail. You can see where it bolts to the front support right there, and runs all the way back the length of the front end of the car. Everything on the passenger side looks good. When we come over to the driver's side, there's a little bit more stuff in the way, but you can see there's no bends, kinks, or damage, and that it's mounted exactly where it should be. I would suspect that this car has had no major front end damage. Well, the Mercedes checks out for the most part. This car definitely has a good amount of wear consistent with its age and mileage. Now, if you're looking at a used car that's a little bit older and has a good amount of miles on it, you should expect a little bit of wear. If the car looks pristine, well, look a little bit closer. It could have been completely reconditioned, which could be a good thing, or it could be hiding some major damage, which would be a bad thing. With no frame damage, no major bodywork, and zero rust, I think that this CLK will make for a great AMG project car, especially at only $4,000. I really want to thank Auto Tempest for being a continued sponsor of the channel. I really enjoy using Auto Tempest to find unique project cars for really cheap prices. I encourage you guys do the same using my link in the description box below. Guys, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you very soon.